At the Parisi Palace, I love 3773 East Broadway. This is the Jake Feinberg Show. Coming to you on Power Talk. Please go to our website, powertalk.live. Download our free app to your smartphone so you can stream all of our live local programming, including Solomon on Blast, the Jim Parisi Show, and yours truly, the Jake Feinberg Show. Can't thank you enough for making this part of your day today, and just back from assignments on the West Coast, and it was typical in that it was completely unpredictable and there was really no logic to it, and I was able to connect with real human beings who are incredibly talented at raising vibrations in this time that we're living in. And one of the cats that I got to see right at the end was a dear friend of mine, Sam Blasucci, who kind of came on my radar almost a year ago when I got to see a band called Grateful Shred. And then I don't know, about a month ago or so, I just had these friend suggestions pop up on my Facebook feed, and I saw this cat, and I'm like, wait a minute, who is this guy? You know, and I saw the mutual friends we had in comedy. Obviously, had this last name, Blasucci. I said, well, he must be related to Sam in some way. And so the other night, I was like, before Sam went on to do his set, I said, who's David Blasucci? He said, that's my father. I said, you got to be kidding me. I said, this is unbelievable. So we got into talking about him, and didn't have a chance to connect in person, but really honored to welcome David Blasucci. Welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show.
Hey, thanks. Good to be here. Thanks for having me on.
You
sound old.
Well, I mean, it's just I'm still a little bit blown away by the whole thing, but I wanted to ask you a little bit about, growing up, how much of an autodidact were you? And because I just feel more and more, I mean, it is what it is. It's become where we live in a very visual learning medium time now. But I think it's fair to say that you might have come up when auditory learning, especially musically, was much more prevalent. And I wanted to know how you evolved in that way.
Well, I think the music experience was much more different. When I grew up, we all got in a room together and somebody bought the new, whatever album, Pink Floyd, or, we all got in a room and listened to it together, and it was more of a social gathering. And I think now music has become so kind of condensed with the headphone era, and everybody's kind of doing their own thing. But, music was such a huge part of my life growing up with my brothers who all played music, their friends. And then when Sam was growing up, obviously music in our home was very prevalent. Sunday dinners, we'd all sit around and play music. So music's always been a big part of my life, and I know a big part of Sam's life too.
I mean, can you talk a little bit about why communal listening, even amongst whether it was family or even a band? I mean, I was talking to John Bolo, the drummer, and I was interviewing him, and he was talking about basically, Chris Robinson. They'll sit back there with Pete Sears and Barry Sless and Molo, and they'll listen to the full gamut of music. It doesn't matter what it's genreless. But what is it about the communal experience? Do you believe that regional music came out of that communal listening?
Well, I don't know about that. I just think that the experience of getting together and listening to music in a way that we used to do that, where everybody would sit around and experience it together, was more of a social, it had a big social impact. Music's very emotional, and to share it with your friends was a big deal. I mean, you couldn't wait until, your favorite band had a new album coming out, and somebody would go down to the record store and get the LP and call all your friends and, let's meet over at so-and-so's house and sit around and just listen to this. And it was just more social back then. It was more of an experience. Now I think music has become, with the iPhones and the earphones and the whole, the earbuds and all that, I think it's become so common to just experience that yourself, when you're, and that has its pros too, but I think just the social aspect of music and really experiencing it with your friends has really kind of changed in a lot of people. And then, there's people like, I keep referring to my son because that's kind of who I have to refer to. But
He's the most legendary character of all time, too, so you might as well, you can drop his name as much as you want.
Well, he paid me good money. I have 5 more times.
No, he's actually turning into a really, really awesome musician, so it's cool to see.
Oh, he plays circles around me. It's funny, when I used to come home, when he was, younger, much younger, I'd come home and he'd say, "Hey, Dad, listen, I learned the solo to something today." The Beatles, sit there and play it. It's pretty awesome. But
You go ahead. I mean, you finish that up, yeah.
I just think the experience has changed, and I think that I think we need to get back to that. I think part of the experience of enjoying music is enjoying it with your friends and your family, and everybody kind of getting off on that experience. And I think we've gone away from that lately. That's technology, I guess.
Well, it's that, and it's also like, I mean, how do you work in the studios? I'm always fascinated with cats like you, like that are working in the studios. Obviously, it's not the factories that it was when Wilton Felder and Leland Sklar and Fred Tackett and all these amazing dudes were just, marinating in the studios, cranking out albums. But even like the way, I just wonder how much of it, not so much the listening part of it, because you're right, it is more of like the idea of listening to music now is like more multitasking, or it's more in isolation. I completely agree with that. But I just wonder about the idea of how dangerous it is societally when you are creating pop stars who actually can't even play an instrument or sing because of auto-tune. You can fix their voice, but because they have 30,000 followers or they look very beautiful, then all of a sudden they're a star. I mean, there's no way that would have gone down with Joni Mitchell or any of these other cats who were, I mean, you just couldn't fake it back in the day. And I think if for my daughters and whatnot, I mean, I just want to make sure that they can detect authenticity in music. And I wonder how often you run into that in the studio when you're overdubbing something or whatever, and it's like the person who's doing it, they're not even a real musician.
Yeah, well, that happens a lot, especially, some of the recent productions I've done. You run into that quite a bit. There's that level of people that struggle with that, and I refuse to use auto-tune. If you can't sing, then you have no business recording.
Thank you so much, dude. I'm so proud. Thank you, bro. You're the first cat that I've ever really heard say that. I mean, I'm talking about even some. Go ahead.
If you want to do it for your own amusement and for your friends, that's one thing. That's fine. But if you're really recording something that you want to record a piece of music and you want to be known as an artist, if you can't sing the song, you have no point. You have no reason to be doing that. So to me, obviously, I don't use it. I've never used it, and I won't use it. But who are at the top of their game, right? I mean, there's no bigger drummer than Jim Keltner. He's played on everybody. John Lennon. Just go down the list of people that he's
a dear friend. I gotta send you. I've done 5 interviews with. He's a dear friend. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, he's a great guy. But guys like him and the pro level now, because of technology, don't have to go to Sunset Sound to record their tracks. They get sent the stuff, and he's got a little studio in his house, and he plays his parts, and sends it back in. So the days of everybody getting into a studio and just kind of creating music that way has also changed. But I think it's also given guys like Jim and pro level guys, it's much easier now to just do their work and get it to where they want it and send it off. So there's 2 different ways of going about it. A lot of bands like to create in the studio. Steely Dan would have a band come in and play a song, and then the next day they'd have a whole other group of guys come in and play the same song. And there's that way of thinking, and now there's also guys that can do everything they need to do at home, and it's much cheaper, it's much more cost effective for everybody involved. So it's just a different world now. but it's also creating a lot more opportunity for people on the pro level to work,
It's interesting, because, Steely Dan had, budgets of like $500,000. I mean, they took like 50 takes on the drum kit to get the right one for Asia, like Harvey Mason walked
Right.
out of the studio and then Steve Gadd came in but, let's just put it like this. I mean, would you say that like, one thing about Sam that's like very cool, and Clay as well, like, I mean, they just come across as like, street scholars. They don't come out of the academy. They're not like obsessed with, like they don't really wank it on the bandstand at all. And I wonder, like for you, was it something like, were you a self-taught musician? Was it something that you just sort of picked up an instrument? I mean, can you talk a little bit about how you? I mean, I'm not talking about like taking a few private lessons, but just in general, like how did you learn your apparatus?
Yeah, I was definitely self-taught. I grew like I said, I grew up with three brothers who all played, and we would all play together all the time when we were together. And it was just, music was just around. There was always instruments around, and it was just a big part of our life. So watching my brother play guitar, I actually started playing drums, was my original instrument, and then watching my brother Michael play guitar. He's a great guitar player. He's a country player. Played with Randy Travis and Ricky Van Shelton, many people. But then I kind of got interested because of him, because it was just always around, and it was the same with Sam. There was just always music around, and it was easy to just pick up a guitar and just start messing around. And I think you either have that inside of you or you don't. Some people take lessons for a little while and it just doesn't, they just don't connect with it, and that's cool. But I think there are a lot of people that it's just inside of them, and it's just a natural thing that when you're sitting around to pick up a guitar and just start playing it and messing around with it and learning chords and learning stuff on your own. That's how I was raised. And that's how, Sam was raised also. There's just, it was just always, the music was always in the house. And,
did that lend itself to like you coming up with your own tuning? Like when I interviewed Alan Toussaint, he's like you need a meter now to tell you if you're in tune. Before your meter was your heart. Has your meter always been your heart?
Yeah, and I think it's that way with most musicians. I think it's it's that connection you have with your instrument. So I definitely think that that don't have that inside of them, and I don't know really how to describe it, but there's just something inside of you that you just have to play, and you have to, when there's a guitar sitting there, you just have to pick it up. When you're, there's probably a talk at all day long. It's funny, my girlfriend Mandy will be sitting and she'll say, "What song are you singing in your head?" And I think I'm just sitting here, we're just sitting talking.
Right.
There's a constant connection with music. And I think for musicians who become musicians for a living, and do that for their life, that's something they do for life. It's just ingrained in you. And that's something you can't teach anybody through music lessons or anything like that. I think it's either you either have it or you don't. So, for better or worse.
Well, I think you're talking about the calling, and it's a pretty serious calling, and there's no guarantees that the art itself will ever pay for itself as well.
Right.
But we have a game on this program called Name That Voice. I'm going to put this audio clip in for you, and then we'll come back and break it down.
Okay.
You have to sort of be be in both worlds. You have to be on stage and you have to be in the studio. And that's a tough one to teach too. I mean, it's simple if they grasp it simply. And so what I've always told singers and players, that I know you technically say, well, there's nobody around, there's no audience, so I can get away with this, or I can make this mistake and do that and do that. And I said, you know, if you're playing to a mic, you're not playing to just that one mic, you're playing to 1 million sets of ears. That's 2 million ears you're playing to. If you think of it
You
that
are
way,
right about that, yeah.
if you think of it that way, you know that there's somebody listening that's the same as watching you and looking at you. You're just a little tadpole in a fishbowl that they're staring down at. And you better wiggle the right way or they're going to get some fresh water and get a new fish.
Stop. You have any idea who that is?
I don't know.
That is the venerable legend Steve Cropper, from my interview with him from back at 2018. But, you know, I mean, does that resonate with you? Like,
For sure.
Can you riff on that? Because I found that to be, it's just as a non-musician, something I never really thought about. But the point is that just because you're in the studio performing doesn't mean you're not really performing to an audience.
Well, yeah, and that to me is the difference between live performance and studio work, is they're so different. And a lot of people who are in bands or musicians play live and then they get in the studio to record, and it's a whole different ballgame, and it's very difficult to adapt. It's a whole different thing because, you know, when you sing live or play live, once it's out, and it's gone unless it's, you know, that's why nobody likes listening to the board mix, because after you finish a gig, you're like, we rocked. And then you go back and
Yeah, no, I dig, man.
What mix is that? You know?
Yeah, I dig.
So studio work is a complete different thing. It's an art in itself, and yeah, you do. You have to get in the mindset of almost like you're playing live. But everything you do is you know, so under a microscope that you got to get it right. And it's really a different art form to record than it is to play live. And Steve is one of the best. I mean, you talk about a legendary guy that a lot of people probably don't know they're even listening to when they hear all the songs. But
They don't, and I mean, he's just so like, it always seems to me that he says what he needs to say, and he doesn't overstate it, doesn't wank it at all. When did you first really start to cook in the studios?
Well, I mean, you know, I've always been, you know, throughout my career as a player, I've done studio work and stuff like that. I've recently, the production side of it I haven't done, and I just started doing maybe the last 8 or so years. But, you know, really where I got my studio chops was when I did Mighty Wind with Christopher Guest and those guys.
Wow.
Because that was my first real taste of working with major producers and really get what needed to be done for a certain song. I worked on a project with Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis a few years back, and I got to know them both well, and especially Terry. And if you're familiar with those guys, you know, the R&B scene in the 80s and 90s, I mean, they owned it. You know,
That's right, yeah.
The Jackson stuff, and just go down the list of stuff they wrote and produced. But, you know, Terry really helped me a lot too, and just kind of the mindset of what it takes to step from a working musician to a real pro musician, and having that attitude and knowing, like you said, knowing when not to play is as important as knowing when to play. You know what I mean?
Absolutely, yeah.
So there's a big mindset there that needs to be learned. And Sam, I think, you know, Terry actually sat down with Sam for quite a while one day, for a couple of hours, and really just sat and talked to him and gave him some really good advice. And it's a mindset, and you have to, and that just comes with experience. And really, if you can work with people that influence you and that have been there, and you can really soak up their experience and their knowledge and learn from that, that to me is a huge a huge step towards being a really successful player, even in the studio or live, you know.
I mean, can you talk about a story? I mean, I've done a few interviews with Johnny McLaughlin, who's just one of the most classic individuals of all, beautiful human being. I'm not a peer of his. I mean, if I was coming up at the time, I know a lot of people were just like, you know, kind of in awe of him because of what was coming out of his guitar. But during his Bitches Brew, I believe, and again, this is interesting. Miles, as the leader, I'm sure Tio Macero was in this, you know, there was a producer there, but I mean, Miles went up to McLaughlin and said, I want you to play the guitar like you don't know how to play the guitar. And it took McLaughlin right out of his original mindset. He was gone. And it was like a Zen trick kind of thing. And if you really listen to that album, he's playing it completely unorthodox. You know, he's really out there riffing on it. And it was just, when he told me that story, he said it got him out of his original mindset. And I'm thinking with David Blasucci, I'm like, was there a time, especially early on, when you were really learning that, how to bring that sense of urgency in the studio, that somebody kind of used one of those, you know, some kind of different Zen trick or just unorthodox style to get the point across, and then maybe only later did you realize that it really was effective?
Well, I'll tell you what, this one project I was working on, and I won't name the producer, but the producer had me play the guitar parts probably 50 or 60 times in a row until he felt that it was perfect. And
wow.
Yeah, but that took me the other way. That made me feel like, well, I don't feel like this is, you know, doing it that much and trying to get it perfect to me is not the personality of the song. I think I'm more inclined to get a few takes, and to me, that's the spontaneity of it is the fun of it. And even hearing other musicians, you know, they know the song, take a few takes and do it. But so that kind of took me the other way of like making it not perfect. I hate when vocals are perfect. You know,
exactly. You're like preaching to the. I mean, this is I mean, why are some? What is it? The aesthetic about people like us that where imperfection is perfection?
Well, I think it's just a different way of looking at it. You know, I think some people have that sense that they want everything to be lined up and perfect, and everything has to be, and that's their personal taste, which is fine. But I like the looseness. I like when a vocal isn't perfectly in tune, but the attitude makes it so it doesn't matter. It's like you're not even thinking about how in tune it is or not, because the performance of it is so great.
It's so great, man. Yeah, I did so much, dude. Yeah.
I mean, look at a band like the Stones. Their whole vibe is built around the looseness of how they play. You know, if you pull apart all those Beatle tracks and listen to their tracks separately, you'd be a documentary. We've got Brian May and Elliot Easton from the Cars, who actually plays in the band also.
Sure.
And we've got Osmond, and we have all these celebs who, basically what we do is we play a song from each album, and in between each song, we have video commentary from these guys who did it specifically for the show.
Wow.
But you've got Brian May talking about, you know, I Want to Hold Your Hand, and how everything just meshes together for him, and it's just like the perfect pop song. But if you pull those tracks apart and listen to George and listen to Ringo and all these things separately, it kind of comes from left field on a lot of their stuff. You know, it's not perfect, but when you put that all together, it's this perfect little piece of music, and it's everybody's own, whatever everybody brings to the table, their own imperfections that make it so, give it such personality. You know, and I understand that certain styles of music that doesn't work. You know, pop stuff, it's very exact, and everything's very auto-tuned and all that, which, you know, if that's your bag, that's great. But I think the real personality is in the music where it's not perfect, and you can really just get you really feel the musicians' personalities coming out in their work rather than the producers. You know, George Martin just added to what the Beatles could do as a group. He didn't try to make them something different, or he didn't try to make them perfect. He just took what they were and kind of put the icing on the cake, you know.
It was also like, I mean,
even in an age where producers are creating artists rather than artists being themselves.
Exactly. Oh yeah. No, I mean, that's because a lot of the jazzers, a lot of the cats that I've interviewed, they talk about the first times they were in the studio. Could have been with like Yusef Lateef or Eddie Miles. I mean, it was typical of the jazz aesthetic, and I hate labels, but it was like literally the musicians communally made the decisions, and it was not the producer making the decisions or the arrangers. It was really the cats that were putting the music together, and that was what was pressed on record. I mean, to me, that was empowering. And have you had those kinds of experiences? I mean, like, what do you consider to be a great, what is the qualities of leadership in the studio that are important in order for the album to burn? I mean, what you're talking about is that visceral descarga, the release, the vibrations, the spiritual part of music. Like, you're hitting on all this stuff. What as a leader in the studio, not a band leader, but as a producer, in your mind, what do you think are the qualities that are most essential in order to get that burning, the music that we love, not necessarily pop music?
Yeah. Well, I think, it all starts with the band. I think if you have a group of guys that are, when they play, it's magical, and you could just, I think that's the first step, is you've got to have a group of guys that really, when they start playing, it's magical. And then you have to figure out a way to have that translate to people when they hear it. But I think as a producer, you have to start with the talent. It's like a musician. You have to start with a good instrument. You know what I mean? If you've got a good instrument and you know how to play it, the rest of it's easy. And I think it's the same with a band. If you've got a good band and they have good songs, I think that's 3/4 of the battle. And all the bands that we're talking about that we love, they weren't virtuoso musicians at all. Excuse me. But their songs were killer, and they just had a magic. It's like when Jim Keltner is talking about, he's in our Long and Winding Road show too, and he's talking about Ringo, and he's saying, he just has a magic, and you can try to copy it, and you can try to get close to it, and you can look at a tape of him playing, and he said you can get close, but he's like, he's talking about his right hand on the hi-hat, and you can try to do that, and then when he throws everything else in, his foot and his big, guys like that just have a magic. George, I think, there's a ton of musicians that have that, and I think that's really what sets them apart from kind of a homemade producer trying to make an artist from a production standpoint rather than from a music standpoint.
I'm going to, I think this next audio clip feeds into what you were just riffing on, so let's take a listen to this and then we'll come back.
LA and the studio scene, there was a period of time there where records were really, really jumping. And there was a short period of time where what now in Sweden and Japan is referred to as West Coast music was kind of hot. I moved here in '77, a year before you were born. And by '78, I was already deep into doing session work here because there were just so many records being made, and so much of it was really good. David Foster was just starting to produce records. Toto was kicking. Steely Dan had really opened the door to you can put some education into this music. You don't have to turn your back on good music and I'm not even going to say good music. You don't have to turn your back on your education in order to get a hit. There was a lot of stuff going on that was pretty damn cool for a certain period of time there. So LA had kind of its own, within the studio scene, it kind of had its own little breakout at the same level that San Francisco did. Now San Francisco, if you try to define the San Francisco sound, you ask somebody from Indiana, they're going to tell you skittle bands with amplifiers. You know? I mean, to start with, this was what was really kind of foisted on the rest of the United States with the Grateful Dead and Jefferson Airplane and Big Brother and the Holding Company. And all really good bands, but they're all really they were sort of folk-oriented to start with, and then somebody just, plugged them in. Mm-hmm. And they started doing it that way. Now, it's not that it's, I came from going over and watching the James Brown Band over at Sweets Ballroom and Oakland Auditorium and, Cow Palace and stuff like that. I mean, we've been watching the James Brown Band, as did, Mick Gillette and all these other people and, Lydia and all these other people that were paying attention to what was going on with R&B. Now, what was really foisted on the United States as San Francisco music had nothing to do with that. The closest thing to getting across on a large scale in the kind of R&B that we were talking about, on a large scale in the United States was Sly and the Family Stone, and they were never really known as a San Francisco band, even though they were.
You want to take a guess at who that is?
I suck at this game.
I don't. That was as far as I know. You might have already, collaborated with this cat. Is Bill Champlin?
Oh yeah, Bill. Man, what a talented guy that he is.
I mean, dude, it took me a while to really get my ear around the Suns, but man, when you listen to all those bands. The most accomplished, polished musical, and I've been talking about how great Imperfection is, but the baddest musicians were in the Sons of Champlin.
Yeah, oh yeah, what a great band! And he, I played with a guy named Bobby Kimball for quite a while. Right after he left Toto, he was the original lead singer of Toto, and he and Bill did a lot of dates together, a lot of studio work together, where they sang backup on a lot of albums, and. Bill's he's just one of those guys that just feels it. You talk about a guy where it comes from inside. That's Bill,
Were you, I'm just trying to get the idea, it's just interesting because when I see Sam play, it doesn't matter whether it's the Liberty Street Singers or Mapache to a less degree, but obviously Grateful Shred. I mean, they're channeling that spirit of I don't know, I mean, you could say it's the Grateful Dead, but it's also kind of what you talked about. Cats that were, I don't want to say coming out of the folk aesthetic, but they definitely didn't come out of the academy. And I'm just trying to figure out, for you, how hip were you to, I mean, what music did you gravitate to outside of your family jam sessions? Was it all music for David Blasucci, or did you really hone in on a certain genre?
The stuff that they were listening to. So, Beach Boys, Beatles, all that kind of stuff. I remember when I was 12, I got one of those cassette decks, where the thing pops up,
Oh yeah, I love those. Yeah. It's the carrier. Yeah.
Yeah, I got that for Christmas, and they gave me my parents gave me 3 cassette tapes with that, and that was Stevie Wonder Talking Book, Beatles Abbey Road, and I think Jackson 5 Greatest Hits.
Oh, that's great.
But that's the kind of stuff that was going on in our house. It's just, and it's funny because, I think what comes out of us, a lot of it has to do with who we're influenced by. And I think, that's one of the things that actually Terry Lewis talked to Sam about when he was giving him advice when Sam was young, was saying, you don't have to like all kinds of music, but you need to be knowledgeable and know who your forefathers were and know who the people were before you that made it possible for you to be doing this. You need to stand on the shoulders of your forefathers. And I think that's what Sam has done really well. Sam's musical landscape is huge. I mean, he knows, he asks me, hey, have you heard, this song by Willie Nelson and stuff that I've never heard before. He's really taking that to heart, and he really does his homework as far as listening to a wide range of stuff. And I think that's really important as a musician. If your influences are very narrow, I think your range of writing, singing, all of that stuff is going to be narrow. So I think, I was lucky growing up because I had really good influences in my home, but the music that they were listening to is what really started me off. And now, I love everything from bluegrass to, because you learn the sensibilities of all these different kinds of music. Bluegrass, you learn what the rules are in bluegrass, and you learn, I'm a huge Babyface fan. I love his vocal arranging.
Wow, yeah.
All those things that you learn throughout your career, and then you kind of pick and choose these little bits that really stuck with you, and it kind of molds who you are as a player and a producer and a singer and all that stuff.
What gives you, I mean, it's a little hard, maybe hard for you to objectively answer this, but, I don't know, when jazz was popular music, you had, essentially 80 to 100 or more cats, and they had their own individual sound. I mean, you could, I did 2 interviews with Bill Cosby before the world caved in on him, and, you could put a blindfold on. He wanted to be Tony Williams. You could put a blindfold on him, and he could tell you what drummer, whether it was Mickey Roker or Pete LaRocca. So everybody had their own sound, and even guys like David Garibaldi would say, like, if somebody came up to him and said, hey man, you sounded just like, Willie, so-and-so drummer, he'd want to slit his wrist. So it was about individuality. And then it's just hard for me now with an instrumental improvisational music to tell who's playing. And I just look at it as a homogenization of sound. It's a result of a lot of things. But what in your mind gives you hope, if you have hope, for the future of individuality in music, individual sound?
Well, thankfully, I think there are still bands and musicians and artists that still have that. I think you obviously you can't go by what's popular anymore, because I think that's the opposite of what you're saying.
Exactly.
But I think that there are definitely still a lot of artists out there and I think it's the circles you run in too. It's like who you hang out with musically. I think also kind of helps you to get turned on to people that you might not be turned on to if you're listening to the radio. The radio is totally different. But I think as long as it's all still people, and it's all still coming from inside of people, and I still think there's always going to be people that are creating their own things from inside of them, and it may be harder to find now, but I think that's just the evolution of technology and just kind of where we've gotten to. But I definitely still think it's out there, and I think me it's got the most soul and the most originality to it. So I tend to a lot of my playlist is probably before 2000.
Exactly. It's funny you bring that up, because I was interviewing a drummer in Long Island, and he was talking about being unable to really classify any music from the last two. Basically, we're in the second decade of the 21st century, and he really can't. You can make these, evolutionary adjustments along the way, as that this music moved into this music and and it's just sort of. Some cats that have been on the earth a lot longer than either one of us would say that we need a complete collapse of civilization in order for new musical vocabulary to thrive. And there is something to be said for the fact that these bastions of regional, hotbeds of music, there's just a huge amount of gentrification. So a lot of their culture gets pushed off the street, or, in the case of like Oakland, now they get pushed out to Richmond or Hayward, or Harlem gets pushed out farther. And I guess one of the reasons I do my show is to make sure that we don't, or the people that care don't forget where we came from. And because if,
But
go ahead.
sorry. I was gonna say, but then you've got guys like Bruno Mars, who, couldn't be any bigger than he is right now. But I don't know if you saw, I don't remember which award show it was, where his acceptance speech for Album of the Year, for just his last album, 24 Karat. He totally paid homage to, he said if it wasn't for guys like Jimmy Jam, Terry Lewis, Teddy Riley, all these guys, the songs that I grew up on, he said that's what molded me to be the artist that I am today. And it's guys like that who still, that to me is the depth of an artist, who knows where he comes from. And he was influenced by these guys. And he's taken that with him and then put his own little spin on it. But that's why I think you'll always have that. There's not as many of those artists around anymore. But there still are guys who come from that mold,
I dig. Yeah.
Yeah. I thought that was really cool.
Yeah, no, some cats have gotten the memo. I just think it's one guy can't do it alone. So you do need a cadre, and I think you're also right because we're saturated with material now. I mean, your folks bought you a cassette player and three cassettes. You go to YouTube now, it's like if you're not really a seeker, or like Sam, is getting off on like Calvin Keys or these obscure cats. I mean, you can go now and you're just saturated with material, so you have to really dive in and seek it. So so there's a lot of factors. I know you say you suck at this name that voice game, but this voice I think you're gonna get. Okay, is the last.
I thought Elvis. So.
Say again.
I thought the last one was Elvis.
I would have, if I interviewed Elvis, man. I would have. These are all interviews that I did, but man, I wish I interviewed Elvis. But no,
Yeah.
This one you might get. So just settle in, and then we'll come back.
Dad, I feel like I was lucky to have my dad teach me instead of somebody else in like some sort of lesson, because it was a lot more open. I could he didn't correct me on really anything that I was doing that wasn't necessarily wrong. Like, I don't play it normal left-handed, and he never really corrected me on that. Had I gone to like a normal teacher, I feel like it would have been different. I would have had to switch and learn the other way. So stuff like that was a lot more open, which I thought I'm glad that I learned from him rather than someone else who was very, everyone doing it last way.
You want to take a guess who that is?
Oh, I know that. That's Dolly Parton.
That was Sam Blasucci. That was your son. From my interview with him and Clay from I don't know, maybe a year ago. And I really want you to talk to people out there, and this can go for not just parents who want to infuse authenticity in their kid, or they want them to, or they hope that they will become authentic musicians. But I love this idea of not changing the way somebody plays. Whatever they're comfortable with. Why did you accept that? Why should other people accept that as it relates to somebody developing their own? Because I think that Sam is, continues to develop his own individual sound. He seems to create his own truth, or he's expressing his own truth on the bandstand, and I think it has in large part to do with the fact that you let him be himself. And I just want you to talk a little bit about that whole process and why seemingly it just was sort of in the flow for you.
Well, I think that goes back to what we talked about earlier. I think it's inside of you, and I think that that's what we were talking about when we said when people take lessons, when kids take lessons, and they do it for a year or two and then they're done with it. It's just not what they're meant to do. I think, like you, it's like no different than what you do. You're meant to do what you do.
Yeah, right. No, I did. Yeah.
It's like, and nobody can teach you really how to do that. That's got to come from inside of you, and you have to have that passion, and that's something that you have to develop inside of yourself. And I think, when Sam was little, he had a little, I think when he was 1 or 2 years old, I got him a fly swatter that was shaped like a guitar, and he used to walk around the house with that thing. He always held it, because Sam plays upside down.
Exactly.
So you take a guitar, a right-handed guitar, and just turn it over the other way. That's how he plays. And he walked around with that fly swatter for 2 years, like that. And then, he would just pick up a guitar that was laying around, and he just started teaching himself how to play that way. I don't know why he learned that way, or why that all went down the way it did. But that's who he was. And, he just kind of developed that himself. And he just kind of evolved and kept evolving as a player. And so to change it, doesn't make any sense. It's like he just needs to be who he is. And I think music has so much to do with your personality your personality comes out in your playing, in your music, again, your influences. And I don't know that you can mold that into somebody. I think you can influence them and give them the tools, but in the end, it's got to come from inside of them. And I think that's what it's been with Sam. It's just he just developed it the way he was meant to do it. And I don't know how to explain it.
No, you're doing it great. I mean, I don't understand. You make it sound kind of easy, and I just wonder why people get hung up on it. I mean, I think sometimes it's just like, you see some parents see personality traits in their kids that remind them of themselves, and they hate those things and they resent them, and it becomes a problem in their relationship with their kid. But like in music, like, why is it just a control thing? I mean, I'm not even talking about like parents, but like, is it just like a teacher will look at a student and say, well, I don't know how to teach them doing it their way. They have to do it my way. Is it really more of a control thing? Because to me, it seems like that would just be the most natural, common sense way to do it if somebody has a different way of doing things. There's a lot of different ways to skin a cat.
Yeah, and I think, it also depends on what we're talking about, what style of music we're talking about. I mean, if you're talking about a classical pianist, that they need to be trained in order to play that style of music. That's more of a cerebral style of music, and really technique is a big part of that. I think songwriting and that kind of thing, when you're talking about rock music or R&B or country or that kind of thing, where it's more about what's inside of you coming out rather than you learning specifically a certain style. I think you just have to. Again, I think not a lot of people have that inside of them, and I think if somebody does, it just comes out.
I think you're right. You can just you can't teach it. It's just in you.
Right. I don't think you can teach somebody how to write a good song. You can teach them what a song should look like and what it should sound like, and kind of, different types of songs. If you want to have a radio hit, it's got to be this. And, I don't think you can teach that, And then you've got a band like Steely Dan, who came at it from a very schooled, they were both very much into, very jazz heads, both those guys.
Huge.
But they knew how to, they created a way to use the music that they love and the changes that they love and the inversions and the phrasings that they learned from jazz and made it into their own thing. And I think that's nothing, I don't think you can teach that. I think that's just inside of you. And sometimes it's successful for you and you can make a living doing that. And sometimes it's just who you are, and a lot of people never. I mean, how many bands or musicians or songwriters that are there that are great players, great writers that we never hear of?
Exactly, a lot.
that has nothing to do with their ability.
Exactly. No, I mean before we wrap set one here, have you? There's only two letters that separate magic and music, and there are two cats that I've interviewed, Lenny White and Billy Cobham, and they both have never done any drugs in their lives, but both of them have had out-of-body experiences on the bandstand where they literally left their physical body while they were playing. And in Billy's case, he was actually watching himself play on the side of the stage. And I wanted to talk to David Blasucci about have you ever transcended your physical body on the bandstand, and could you talk about it if you have?
Well, I don't know that I've ever done that, but I definitely know of times when I, felt like I was definitely gone to a different place, I remember when I was first playing with Bobby Kimball, I remember a few times when I felt that, like, it's hard to describe, but it's definitely, when you've got the audience and you're going off on a solo and you just, there were a few times where I felt like I definitely was at a place I'd never been before, Yeah, for sure.
I mean, even though it's hard to put into words, I mean, is it like a synesthesia kind of thing where you're like, tasting smells or that kind of
like a euphoric. It's like a euphoric feeling that you feel, and it's only happened for me a few times. It's not, where it really felt like I was out of my body and just in a different, up in the clouds kind of thing.
Yeah, in the clouds. Yeah, wrapped in a cloud, man.
Yeah, it's really kind of hard to explain, but I've definitely felt that before. Yeah, it's an interesting thing. Music is just, it's so emotional, It's just really an emotional thing, and if you're really tied to it that way, man, it's the emotion of life, without music. I mean, look how many people, that song reminds me of when I was in high school and I broke up with that girl. I mean, music is something that I think you get from music. You can't get that from anything else,
I saw it the other night, actually, when the Liberty Street Singers were wrapping up, and they had a rhythm section with Dan Horn and other people playing, Farmer Dave, and they could have wrapped the last. They played. The crowd. It was actually a really great crowd. Vibrations were incredibly high. It was so fun, and they were wrapping up. They were playing the encore, and they could have just mailed it in. Like they already burned it up. They could have just called it a day and said thank you so much, and everyone would have had a ball, and no one would have known the difference. And I was just sort of like in a melancholy state, knowing that the gig was coming to a close, but the song never ended. It kept going for like another 8 minutes, and they kept. Yeah. And I went to Clay. I said, I mean, it just left me just vibrating everywhere. And I went to Clay. I said, how does that work? Because I thought you were just going to bring it down and call it a day. And he looked at me, and he just said, we were having too much fun. And I think that is the euphoria, that experience is intoxicating and magical, but equally important, I think. And I just wanted you to, just before I let you go, do you understand your role in music as that you are a conduit for the music, and have you been able to manage your ego or get out of the way of your ego? Because I think sometimes a lot of people, as they get older, especially if they've had a lot of commercial success over time, then the phone maybe stops ringing, or for whatever reason, they become very bitter and resentful because they actually believe they were fully responsible for the music that they were creating. And I want to know about whether you believe you're just a conduit for the music.
Yeah, I definitely believe that, and I think Clay totally hit it on the head. It's like when it stops being fun and it stops and you're doing it, when you're doing it for that reason, you know, when you start doing it for the wrong reasons, that's when I think you see a lot of that happening. I think, and that's what goes back to, it's either inside of you or it's not, you know. I think when it's something that you can't imagine yourself never doing, like, you know, I could never imagine myself not playing music. And I have friends that don't play anymore because they've lost that feeling. It's not fun anymore, you know. And I think that's a huge key because, you know, that's what keeps it. I mean, look, a lot of, you know, there's not a lot of people getting rich from music anymore. You know, the days of, oh, if I just get one hit, I'm set for life, are done. You know, I've got a friend that was a co-writer on the Lady Antebellum, their first hit, and you know, 72 million streams on Spotify, and he didn't have enough. You know, his payout for that was not even enough to, you know, make a down payment on a house. So the days of doing it for money, you know, if you're doing it for money, you're doing it for the wrong reasons. Because number one, those days are over. I mean, unless you're really at the top of your, you know, at the top of the heap as far as, you know, guys that are really still making a bunch of money on, and for those guys, it's even, they're touring. I mean, if it's, you know, you see all these bands now that are on the road, Fleetwood Mac, all these bands now, that's how they're making their money, because they're not making it off of record sales, they're not making it off of CD sales anymore. So,
well, that's a whole, that is an absolutely whole other, I mean, David, I got I gotta wrap this up. Can we do a part 2 in the near future? I really had a ball today, man.
Sure, I'd love to.
Oh, that's great, man. Yeah, I mean, I eventually come out and catch you play live. It was just such a trip. I mean, I was like, "Who's David Blasucci?" Sam's like, "He's my dad." I said, "Are you kidding?" That's so tripped out.
Well, who's David Blasucci?
Well, because you know what?
Come out.
Yeah.
I'd love you to come out to the Long and Winding Road, that show, because that, you know, it's a really great group of guys. That it's players, the bass player from Neil Diamond, and the drummer from Pat Benatar, and the keyboard player from Player, and another keyboard player who played with Michael Jackson and Stevie Wonder. The band is just killer.
Burning. Yeah. So I mean, let me know when that. Anyway, let's just stay in touch, man. But I mean, I can't wait to come catch a hang. I'm a huge Blasucci lineage family guy at this point in my life. It's feeding me. So much love.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, much love to you, man. Take it easy. Have a good day.
All right, you too.
All right, man. Peace. Decorated musician David Blasucci, and we will be right back on the other side on the Jake Fine.